So you want to raise money for your startup idea. Hey everyone, jayhoovy here, and as a fellow startup founder, I'm super excited about this video helping you raise capital for your business.
For $500,000 for 1% of my company, Lark.
For those of you who don't know, I run a startup called Stan, and we help online entrepreneurs and content creators monetize their following. So just like you, I've been navigating all the ups and downs of building a business, iterating through product market fit, hiring and managing a team, and trying to raise capital for my startup. So in this video, I'm gonna answer 4 common questions I often get from fellow founders on how to raise funds for your startup. Also, if you have any questions that I don't answer in this video, make sure to comment below, and I promise you I will actually respond and help you out. So let's jump in. Question number 1, what do investors wanna see in a startup? So the broad answer is that we're looking for everything, but to actually make this useful and digestible to you, there are 4 main things that we're looking for. 1 is we're thinking about your market. 2 is we're looking at your product within that market and how it differentiates. 3, we're looking at growth potential. And 4, we're looking at the quality of the team. So let's dive into each one of those. Number 1 is market. What do I mean by market? Well, we're thinking about all the stakeholders that are already at play in whatever ecosystem you're building in. So let's say you wanted to redefine and disrupt search engines. Well, the first thing I'd say as an investor is, oh my gosh, Google is a huge competitor in your market. How are you gonna win? That's an example of a competitor in your market that would present a risk or a red flag for me in making this investment. You also need to think about stakeholders beyond your competition. For example, what about regulation? If you're playing in a highly regulated market like healthcare or fintech, then you have to think about the compliance angle and how that affects your business. Then there's supplier risk. Let's say you're running a direct-to-consumer startup that only relies on Chinese manufacturing. Well, if you were running your business early during COVID, when all international supply chains shut down, you wouldn't have any supply chains to give you product to sell. And then that leads us to number 2, which is your product market fit. Specifically, how does your product play within this market? And how is it differentiated? So product market fit is a really big, vague, and complex idea. I'm gonna do my best to try to boil this down into something actionable for you. Finding product market fit is all about finding a target consumer and then building a 10x value prop for that consumer. A great example of this is Slack. Slack spent years starting out as a gaming company. Stuart Butterfield and his team were trying to build a role-playing video game and had just built an internal communication tool for them to talk with in their company. And as they were constantly iterating on their game, they realized that their market was very competitive within role-playing games. But this internal communication tool that they had was something that people outside of their company wanted to use. So when you think about product market fit in this scenario, your target customer was the general knowledge or desk worker who was chained to the legacy systems of email. Lo and behold, Slack comes across as this internal communication tool that allows you to better facilitate communication within your company. This was a 10x value prop. Now, what's worth noting is that even within the same market, multiple companies can have multiple different flavors of product market fit. Take Discord, for example. The core product is actually relatively similar to what Slack has, but they went after a completely different entry customer, and that was gamers. Despite the fact that Discord and Slack have relatively similar products at a surface level, they both can build multi-billion-dollar businesses, reinventing the industry of communication. So how do you know if you have product market fit? Well, a lot of people say it's really just a feeling, and I myself can kind of back that up. If you're organically having customers tell you how much they love their product and they're actively referring your friends, or you're drowning in customer demand and inbound and you can't keep up with the pipeline, then you likely have some version of product market fit. On the other hand, if you're struggling to close sales, you're finding yourself over-explaining your product, or relying entirely on paid and inorganic acquisition channels, you likely need to keep iterating on your product market fit. Third is growth potential, which relates back to market. VCs and investors are looking for a company that's gonna become the next Uber or the next Facebook, which means a lot of growth. But don't take my word for it. Why don't we take Daddy Bezos' word instead? You wanna make sure that you're playing in a market that's growing really, really quickly, and that you also have the opportunity within that market to grow really quickly as well. And lastly, and probably the most important thing with an early stage investment opportunity, is team. Investors want to know why your team is the very best to solve the problem you're going after. For example, the reason why I'm building Stan and why we resonate so much with our customers is because I'm a creator myself and understand how hard it is and the pain points that come with being a creator. On the flip side, if I decided to start a women's swimwear brand, I probably wouldn't do a very good job. I don't personally wear women's swimwear. And so I likely wouldn't understand the pain points of a consumer that was interested in women's swimwear. Not a very good investment. The other aspect to team that investors are looking for is building out a team with complementary skill sets. If you think about the best basketball teams in the world, they don't just have 4 point guards or 5 centers. They have a center, a power forward, a point guard. They have 5 different great players all on the court playing different positions. And so you need the same for your team. You can't just have 5 different salespeople selling a product, because then you won't have anyone building your product. Instead, you need to build a complementary team. Starting with a pair of 2, you can have a business lead and a technical lead. If you want to get larger than that, then you can think about business as operations and go to market. And then you can have product and engineering split out as well. Especially at the earliest stages, when you're likely to pivot and iterate through a bunch of different ideas and potentially even markets, the number one thing that investors are looking for is how great this team is and how resilient can they be in building a multi-billion-dollar business. Question number 2, what kind of funding is available for tech startups? You have 2 main sources of funding, debt and equity. Unless you already have a consistent stream of income, I would not recommend debt. Because if you miss an interest payment, then your company will go into default and the big bad banks could seize your company. And so most startup founders go the equity route. Equity is when someone buys a portion of your company. And at the earliest stages of your startup, there are 2 main forms of equity investors, venture capitalists and angel investors. As your company gets larger, there are also other institutions that'll be interested in investing in your company. For example, family offices, pension funds, growth equity funds, and even larger traditional private equity funds. And eventually, maybe one day your company will get to the size where it goes public. But how do you actually get access to that funding? That just so happens to be question number 3. How do you get connected to potential investors? The best place to start is your personal network. A warm intro will always be better than a cold intro. Pour through your LinkedIn and start with potential advisors. Do you already know anyone in your industry that might be able to help you out and give you advice? Well, schedule a conversation with them and gauge their interest. They themselves might be interested in investing as an angel advisor or might know people in the industry who would love to invest and meet you. From there, you can also ask your network for introductions to venture capital investors. But then that brings up the follow-up question, what if I don't have any investors in my network or my network's network? There are a ton of online resources like AngelList where you can go out and find the very best investors for your space. You can network with these investors at their firm's events or industry events. Beyond that, you should also seek to build a relationship with those investors rather than purely going cold outbound and pitching your company. Because most professional investors are so inundated in company investment opportunities, they're likely not going to look at your cold email. Yes, sending a thoughtful, highly tailored cold email will always work with some percentage of probability, but I would highly recommend building genuine relationships with investors in your industry before you go and try to do cold outbound. And that brings us to the final question. What does the investment fundraising process actually look like? So it's kind of like dating and then trying to get married. You put together the deck and then you meet a bunch of investors to pitch the opportunity. And if you both like each other, you'll go on a second date. From there, the investors are going to want to dig down into your company and the opportunity. They use this fancy business term called diligence. Basically, diligence is just investors looking into those key areas we talked about earlier. How large and competitive is your market? Why will your product win? How much of an opportunity is there to build $1 billion business? And why is this team the best team to solve this problem? Investors will conduct diligence through a host of different methods. They'll call your competitors. They'll talk to your customers.
Don't spit in that cop's burger.
Yeah, thanks.
Roger, I'll leave it there.
They'll talk to prospective customers. They'll call experts in your industry. They'll also do primary research. Maybe they'll play around with your product and collect survey data. And that's all in addition to looking at your company, your finances, your metrics, and your performance so far. So let's say diligence checks out and you also like the investor, because keep in mind for yourself, not all money is equal. If you think you're gonna run your company for 5 to 10 years, that's unfortunately longer than many marriages. And you don't want to get a divorce, so you need to make sure that the investor you're bringing in aligns with your values and will be with you for the long term. And if that all works out, you'll get a term sheet. A term sheet lays out the terms of your deal. So for example, how much an investor is investing, at what valuation is your company being valued, and any other terms that they want to throw in. This is the part where there's also some negotiation. And oftentimes, in order to get the best terms on your term sheet, founders will go out and meet with multiple investors and get multiple term sheets and suitors. You can leverage this competitive tension to get the very best terms from the ideal partner that you want. But make sure to do this with very high integrity. You're playing a very risky game where you could end up with no investors at the table at the end. So once you've negotiated your deal and received that dream term sheet, then you can sign that term sheet. And after a bit of legalese and confirmatory diligence where folks are checking off the boxes, you'll eventually receive your wire and your funding in your bank account. And then you can go right back to focusing on building a great company. That about wraps it up for this video. I hope you found this video helpful in raising your first round of funding. If you want to get my lessons learned building Stand to help you in your founder's journey, make sure to like and subscribe.